Welcome back to the Berg Podcast. Thanks for joining me today. With me today is Ford.
Hey, how's it going?
And Dan.
Hey, everybody.
And we just spent the last 4 hours talking about equipment rates. And not every piece of equipment, because like when we started this conversation, I was like, 4 hours of equipment rates, that's going to be a lot of equipment. We talked about 3 pieces of equipment. And for me, not necessarily always being from the construction world, that was an immersive experience.
Trying to keep your eyes open, is that what you're trying to say?
No, I actually found it very interesting. I really did.
Yeah, I thought, it's funny because the three of us, right? So like Brian, I felt like was super focused and really paying attention. He was taking notes. I took no notes. I wrote like a sentence that I was going to take a note and then took no notes, and was just my ADD sort of side of me was kicking in, where it wasn't that I wasn't interested or I didn't know what we were talking about, but I was finding myself like we're looking outside, like it'd be nice to go for a walk right now. Maybe I could stand up and move around. And then I panned over at Ford, and Ford started to like look at some stuff on his computer. I saw the financials up, right? Like that's what I was trying to point out to you when I tapped you, was Ford was looking at our system and looking at what was going on. I was like, we're reaching the end of our attention spans here.
Well, because the interesting thing is like what we're doing here. Well, the room is also an iceberg. No pun intended there.
Yeah, quite chilly.
Yes, but what we're doing is we're with our peer group and we're all talking about the same piece of equipment, so we can normalize between all of us and how all of us can look at the same thing differently. I think that's what it really boiled down to. Different people put different things into it. We talked about the utilization and different people and different types of work, and we also talked about idle time. How do you account for that, because everything has a cost, no matter what you're doing, and how do you capture that to make sure that you can handle bidding the next project accurately and also winning the job and then also doing the job successfully. That's what it all boils down to. No matter, 8 different people had 8 different ways of looking at it, and it was all about the same end goal.
And a lot of it, the numbers ended up similar. Not everybody. I mean, there's a little bit of variation there based on we're all in heavy civil or some variation thereof. But there was a couple places where it was cheaper or more based on how much utilization they were going to get. But the mechanisms being different was what was really strange, right? Like how they arrived at what their number should be. And then you go through all this math and you ended up at a number that's fairly close. Like to an outsider, we would say there's a difference.
Right.
But to an outsider looking at it, you'd say, if you're within 5-10%, that's pretty good that you had people that never talked to each other about this, had no idea what their costs were, what fuel was, what all these other things, and yet you end up at very similar numbers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. So you're right. So 8 different people, 8 totally different perspectives. Some of us use very similar equipment. Some of us don't use the same equipment whatsoever. Right, when you get to guys like Midwest Mole and Milburn. Yep, exactly. So as I'm taking notes, because I found it all very interesting, like I'm really started like mentally digging through, 1, how we come to conclusions, and 2, do we do it and I was about to say like the right way, because there isn't really, in my opinion, a right way out of the 8 different variations that we've seen so far. But do we think about it from the correct perspective when we're preparing it? And I personally really enjoyed the conversation, because I thought that hearing different people's approaches was really insightful to me about what I think we do well in some ways, and where I think that we're probably lacking or need to at least question what we're doing in other ways.
I thought it was interesting too, Ford, and I don't know if you sort of felt this, but the personality of the company, right? Like we always say culture, and culture is a thing, but the personality of like the people who are coming up with what these rates are and how you calculate them was really reflected in a lot of times in how they did it. You had very math-driven people who were using the spreadsheets to really get to a number. You had another one of the guys who used just as much math, but it was based off of like literally he made a joke about it, that he's like in a 12-step program for how much he loves equipment, right? And his understanding of the actual costs, the actual revenue, how the money's broken out, where it should be, changing the pins, everything was so detailed in his understanding, and then you had all the way, like I put, me on all the way to the other end of the spectrum. Like I'm looking at the numbers and I was willing to take for granted some of the costs that we were able to find and identify what they were, because we didn't track well enough at that point. And it's just such a crazy spectrum, and yet you get to it at the end of the day, and they're there, and I think for my purposes, I think it does a little bit represent how the personality of Berg. You know what I mean? Ford really enjoyed this industry enough that he decided he was going to make it his life. And I think that that's reflected in how we got to our numbers, is that we said, like, we want to do this, and how are we going to be able to figure out how to do it, and being willing to take the leap to do it before we really knew what the cost was. And that's one of the things that Heath had said when we walked away, was he said, it's the thing is, you want to be able to know what the next one's going to cost, exactly what it's going to cost and why. And Ford's willingness to take that leap and just not know the cost, but say, I think I can figure it out and we'll get it done, is sort of really speaks to the personality that Berg is.
Yeah, I totally agree. One of the interesting things for me was like regarding the utilization factor, right? So as we started to talk through utilization expectations, so we a lot of us came out to very similar rates, like you mentioned before, Dan, right? But the type of work that each of us does varies from company to company, and because of that, the utilization of equipment was vastly different, right? We have sort of like a utilization target or an expectation. You're talking about Heath and like his utilization averages and targets are significantly higher. And then you go to guys like Jason, and Don, and they're like, well, we've got such like specialized pieces of equipment that we might have something that sits totally still for a year. It sits in our yard for a year. We don't even touch the thing, but it still makes sense for us to have it, because when we go to bill for that thing, it's so astronomical and we're the only people regionally who have it, that it makes sense. So.
Well, I think that, and also part of what we're really experiencing is the maturation process of us, that we need to, I think the other thing that was a part of this group was all these different companies are at different age points in their growth cycle. And the companies that have been around for a long time, because they've tracked that data, they have their internal stuff. Some of the newer companies that don't, they're using, even like ourselves, some of the stuff that comes from outside sources. But as we continue to track this stuff better, get better at tracking it, making sure the data is entered appropriately, we'll be able to have some of that historical data that we're still working through, because of that's, we got new accounting software to be able to handle that, using the softwares we have with HCSS and stuff better, so that we are able to actually accurately reflect it. Because the whole reason for adding all this stuff is we wanted to know where zero is.
Yeah.
And that's,
it's funny.
We're still working to try and find that exact thing, but you need to know where zero is, so that if you have to do something someday, you know exactly where that zero is. And it's a moving target, unfortunately, but you can get much closer to it than what we currently are.
Well, and let's take a second to talk about why, right? The why for zero is that one of the worst feelings as an estimator is when you put a bid together and you put a lot of time and you have other people helping you and you've invested a lot of time in it. And then I don't know what's worse for it, when you're not close or when you are close. When you are close, it hurts worse, but when you can sort of live with it, right? Like you made choices, you went in at the number you wanted.
We looked at it the same as the winning bidder. We just had a little higher cost.
We just had a little higher cost, or decided we wanted a safer, more protection in that bid than they did. They needed it worse than we did. But when somebody just beats you, and that's happened to us over the past year or so, there's been a couple companies that just, I feel like we're snake bitten at times. Like, this is, how could they possibly do this job for this number? And so you start to wonder and you question, like, well, what are our rates? And then you look at just the cycles of a market, that you're going to, at some point, there will be a real recession, and God willing, Berg is going to be in business at that point, and we're going to be successful and be at least the size we are now. And we want to continue to be able to take care of everyone that's with us. And to do that, we have to be able to know how low we can drop some of these numbers and still go in, perform the job effectively, and survive as a company. And we're not going to know that if we don't find out what zero is.
Yeah, for sure. And along those lines, like, all right, so if we understand what zero is, how much do we have to like lean into our team to make sure that from a production value, we can maintain appropriate production, even when we turn some of those numbers down, to make sure that we're staying competitive, we're staying profitable, we're keeping the lights on, the doors open, all of those things. And if we don't understand like where the floor is, that's a really difficult thing to do.
Well, then everybody's competitive in some way. And so if two different foremen or superintendents are running jobs, they want to know are they beating their things, that kind of stuff. And we've heard it from our team members looking for that kind of stuff. And so the better data we have the better we can reflect this and allow them to, try and beat things as they can and use their knowledge and their experience to try and, beat the stuff that we put together for them for that project. And then everybody's more successful that way.
Yeah, it's a big piece of what we're going to do going forward, because it's one of those things. I don't think there's anything special about Dan or Brian or Ford. Like, in other words, and I don't mean that in an insulting way. I mean, we're not like exceptional, right? But when we try and grow the company and you have to empower employees to be able to do these functions, to do these jobs, to have these responsibilities, we're learning as people how we empower the people, but also empower them into something that they're actually capable of doing. Like if I said, like, Brian, I empower you to do, X, and the way you're going to do it is by doing, just do what I would do. Like, like, what does that mean? Like,
just make the same decision the way I would have made it.
Just make the same decision I would. You're not me. You don't think you know what I mean? Like, you're setting them up for failure. Yes, I empowered you to potentially make a bad decision that I would be just completely not understand why you did it if I was not paying attention. And so we needed to be able to formalize things, right? And that's not an easy thing for me to say. You know what I mean? Because I like to be able to operate with less formality so that I'm free to be able to interact in a way that I can help us get to an end. Mm-hmm. And I would love for the people on our team to have that same flexibility someday. But first, they have to have the formality to be able to know what decisions they're making and why, and not because they're inexperienced, because otherwise I have no way to explain to them what my thinking was, because I didn't make it because I knew what zero was. You know what I mean? And I think back to my own growth in the company and how Ford managed me in a way that I did not realize the formalities that were sitting there around me that he was trying to put up so that I wouldn't make too many mistakes, because I made mistakes, right. But he tried to limit the damage of those mistakes as I learned, but let me learn in a way that I felt I didn't have that formality. And then that's an amazing ability as a leader, but I'm still trying to figure out how to do that with my own team, who is far more qualified than I was when I started.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about that along those same lines. So, when I transitioned into my position, I came from outside of the construction world. I had a different skill set and set of knowledge that lends to what I'm doing currently, but approached it from a much different perspective. And so, and I was even thinking about that as we're going through our rate calculations, right? You and I kind of chatting back and forth here as we're listening to how some other people do some things. And our approach that we took when we created these rates was calculated and informed, and yet was the exact culmination of our experiences, right? And so we gathered a lot of information from what we deemed to be reliable sources, and we came up with things that we thought were accurate and conservative in some ways and appropriate for our business model. And it's worked. But yet our experiences over even the last 3 to 5 years have changed dramatically. And that's what I was trying like referencing earlier. Like, as I made some notes, like, are we still asking the right questions? Should we be asking different questions? Has our perspective changed? Have our needs changed? Has our model changed, et cetera? So
yeah, there's a note, like there's phrases that I like, one of them not relevant is it always says in a gold rush, sell picks and axes, right? In other words, so you don't necessarily want to do the thing that people are doing that's exploding right at that point. You want to be supporting the thing that people are doing, right? Like in Ohio right now, if you're a site work company, and there's some of them, Beaver's a great example, and the chip companies are building out there, you don't want to be the chip maker. You want to be the guy doing the plumbing, or the guy putting the building pad in, or the guy doing the paving, because they're going to make the money.
You want to be the one setting it up.
Right. You want to be setting it up. Yeah. But another one is that the information you don't have is likely more valuable than the information you do. Right. Like, in other words, there's a story about in World War II, the planes came back and they would look at where the planes were all shot up, and they kept bolstering those places until an engineer, or it wasn't an engineer, but like an engineer type person said, well, those are the planes that are coming back. Where are the planes that aren't coming back getting shot? And when they tried to do a little reconnaissance and looking into it and try and get some details from like radio transmissions, they realized The planes that went down always got shot in the same spots. And now they're armoring the places that it doesn't matter. And so I think that's relevant here as we started to look at numbers, and you and I talked, before we left. And I just looked at it and I was like, the things that we don't know are actually the things that are going to be, that we have to figure out, because we realized that we didn't know them, but so many times they're in your blind spot, you don't see them. And so you don't even look for the answer.
You're moving so fast. You're like, you didn't stop to think if it's something that you needed to know.
No. And that's when you asked me about one particular thing, and I was like, well, that's what they told me the answer was. And it was like that. I said it to you knowing it was the wrong answer.
Well, we knew,
but it was the best I had at the time.
But it wasn't because we found the answer. It was because it was given to us, and that didn't necessarily make us better at what we do, right?
And it didn't make the answer right.
Right.
Or wrong. I mean, that's the good part of using that experience. It got us close, but it didn't get us. Yeah. It's a refinement, a continual improvement is what we're really looking for. It's always better tomorrow than we are today.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it boils down to all the way around.
Because that's so much what our team really is we're going to get it done. We're going to be successful because we're going to commit to continuing to move forward every single day and be better.
Yeah.
Right. So that's not the question. The question is, can we give ourselves a little bit more runway so we know more, and Heath, they always have a few lines. Heath said outside, he said, I want to drive the plane from the front, not from the bathroom.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. In other words, I don't think we're driving from the bathroom.
No.
But
No.
I do think that we may have a couple like autopilot switches on, that we need to figure out what the real control points are. So
100%.
Aiden's going to have a heck of a time cleaning this up.
We picked a location that wasn't exactly a vacuum here.
We could have this podcast though. We could have like guests of guests. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
just call people out. Yeah.
Just start passing a microphone around.
Yeah. Just start passing a microphone around, and they'd see some of this group. It's an impressive group. It's a really good group of guys. They mesh well, and the knowledge in this room far exceeds anything I'm ever going to have. So.
100%. Yep. 100%. And I think that almost to like capitalize on what Ford just said, I think that like this entire conversation has been about like, if you're not growing, you're dying, right?
Yeah.
Right. And making sure that we continue to grow, continue to adapt, and continue to change our perspective and look for new ways to think about the same things, it can only make us better.
And accept that you're not, like, your way isn't the way.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I made a few jokes about some of the things in the spreadsheets because it's just not me. I mean, I love to put together a spreadsheet, but it's a terrible spreadsheet that Excel with Mike. But, we've talked about it. I don't know if we've talked about it, but I enjoy chaos. Yeah. I think I strive in chaos, but it doesn't mean I should make everyone live in chaos. It unnerves other people, so that's, as I look around the room, and work with the people, that's what I take from it is just because I don't enjoy doing it that way doesn't make it not right. Yeah. Like, in other words, I need to open up my eyes and be an adult and say, like, that's a good way to do it. I need to figure out what that answer is and empower and require my team to get some of this data back to our team so that Dylan and Decker and you and I can sit down and talk about it. And the next time we have a discussion about this, we'll know this number because there's no reason we shouldn't other than we didn't.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Well, cool. That's
probably
some
work
a good
in front of
place.
us.
Yeah, we got about 4 more hours of it. So that's a good place to wrap it up. But thanks for joining us today, folks. Hope you got something from this conversation, and we hope you join us for another episode.